Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Well, howdy folks, and welcome to the monthly review for February. There is quite a bit to get into, so let's not dilly-dally and jump right in. Starting off with our honorable mentions. In the solo category, there were actually quite a few entries this month, and it was difficult to pick just 3 to recognize here. So first up, and I'm going to butcher this name, Deets, I don't know. Sorry. But they painted up this Lust Demon Sorcerer here, and it's very, very smooth. The skin is so well done, it almost looks real. And the face has got a lot of attention, especially the eyes. The whole job here, the paint job on the face, makes it look menacing, but also mischievous, with that slight smile that suggests she's really enjoying this, which fits perfectly with the whole Lust Demon aspect. Donkey Kong 64 is the next honorable mention, and gets an honorable mention for 2 reasons. First, painting against type. Most schemes for the HDF are going to be camo, with earth tones to blend into forests, deserts, etc. But this one decided to go super colorful. One of the models that actually won the competition also went with a very stark and bright scheme that goes against what's typically expected. So it looks like painters are starting to become a little bit more comfortable testing out different schemes and palettes and kind of painting outside the lines, if you can imagine. Coupled with that, I was really impressed at the color transition on that rifle. It goes from bright yellow to black, but passes through almost the entire spectrum on the way, going from orange to red to purple, and then eventually in black. And there's not a lot of space to fit that many colors on such a tiny model. And so, to be able to get that kind of transition, have a nice smooth transition from each one on such a small space, I think that's really impressive. Now, I don't think too many armies would paint their rifles to look like a bag of Skittles, but what I'm applauding here is the skill and the technique demonstrated. Next up is Nathan Hengst. I was torn between his and Z Rune Lord's, but since Z Rune Lord got an honorable mention last month, I decided to give it to Nathan here. Nathan has a simple scheme that's executed cleanly. And again, kudos on the face painting. Really good job with shadow and highlight to give the mouth, the cheekbones, and the nose some definition without making it look like he's wearing stage makeup. Also, notice the detail given to the beard. You can see individual brush strokes picking out the hairs so that the beard and the eyebrows have just as much detail as the rest of the face. The only thing this model needs now is a quick spray with some dull coat to take away that shine and make it look a little less like a porcelain or something plastic, and to make it look more like cloth, fabric, and skin. But nice job overall. Moving on to the unit category. First, we have Zbynik Vajda. Again, apologies if I mispronounced that. The overall scheme fits with the look of the Wood Elves. I really like it, but what caught my eye the most was the unusual skin tones, especially marking out the hero that way as well. So it's unusual, but it still comes across nice and clean, so well done there. Matthew Smith is our next honorable mention for doing an entire diorama of HDF artillery. Now, while the whole point of camo and uniforms is to blend into the background and not be seen, you don't want your model to disappear into the background. So Matthew's done a good job here of trying to balance that out, getting the khaki of the infantry to match the background without completely blending into it. And those little extra touches, like the graffiti on the wall, the bright green ammo crates, the metal and the concrete parts, give the piece some color to break up all that brown. And the third honorable mention goes to Natwalk for his Wood Elf Bowman. Very similar to what I said about Nathan in the solo mention, it's a solid paint job with a nice color scheme that's executed cleanly. And the only thing you could do to improve it is give it a little spray of dull coat to take away that shine from the paints. But otherwise, really well done. Now, as for the legendary category, it only had 4 entries, and so all of them can be seen on Discord and on Patreon as winners of this particular month's painting competition. Okay, so now let's move on to news and events. So the Rangers program is now up and live. OPR has posted both a directory of those participating so people can find a contact close to them, as well as upcoming and ongoing events, and yes, yours truly is on the list. I can also tell you that the Ranger program is already working because shortly after it posted, I got an email from a new player in my area who has now joined my Slow Grow League that started up about a week ago. So if you haven't already, see if there's a Ranger near you, because that might mean there's an existing OnePageRules community already in your area. And if you find that there isn't one near you, then maybe think about joining the program and becoming the first person to found that community. Moving on, the next item is the Last Tier narrative campaign. It is now live. I made a bit of an error in the last monthly review saying it was like the Assault on Malhadra. Malhadra is a mission pack. This is a story-driven campaign. It doesn't have quite as many missions as Malhadra, but otherwise it's pretty much the same. It presents missions to play set within a specific part of the lore and introduces new named heroes and models. Like, for example, the model for Vaknip here. Now, I've said this before. Since the Ratmen in OPR are going the opposite direction of what everyone's used to with Skaven and Warhammer, and are trying to be more noble, like the mice in The Secret of Nim or the Tales of Despero, rather than the whole mice and rats or vermin thing, I think the Red Wall theme painted army for these guys would be a great idea. Although, I must say I'm not a huge fan of the name. I keep seeing Vaknip and thinking that it says catnip, and given that cats eat mice and really love eating catnip, I don't know, you see where that goes for me. But whatever. The model for Cleaverfang is certainly busy. There's a lot of detail in there, but I really like the arrows, spears, and other weapons sticking out of him. It makes it look like he's already chewed through dozens of challengers and opponents and just keeps going and doesn't give two craps about what kind of damage he's taking. These models are, of course, in addition to the other two heroes that were previewed in January. The next item here is just a quick one, but with a very significant element to it. OPR has released tournament packs that provide instructions and guidelines for running OPR tournaments. Now, OPR has recently started jumping more into the tourney scene officially, and it seems that after some trial and error, they've come up with a book or booklet here that can help organizers avoid making some of those early first-time mistakes. The significance that I wanted to mention is that when Tano talked about this during the monthly live stream, he was very clear that OnePageRules is still designed as a casual game, and that the tournament packs are not an indication that OPR is heading in that direction. It's more of a convenience to those who want to run tournaments, but at its heart, OPR wants to remain a game for casual hobbyists and players rather than shifting towards catering to the competitive and tournament scene. So that was good to hear. He's reaching out to try and give different kinds of players what they're looking for, but at the same time declaring that the game is still continuing on the same general direction. Moving on, OnePageRules is going to be at Adepticon, and with a much bigger presence this time. This year, they have a fully dedicated space. I think last year they were sharing with somebody else. And they're going to be running demos, not just being a show and tell booth where they'll talk to you and hand you out a free model. Also, Tano said that as of the live stream, all of the demo game sessions have been booked, which is great. It means that the game is growing, or that there's interest in people wanting to see what this game is all about. So if last year it's just sharing a booth and showing off stuff, this year it has its own space and it's running demos that have already been booked. That's nothing but good news. Now, next up is an interesting update on game development. During the last live stream, Tano mentioned that he wanted to create a system whereby special rules could be essentially made open source, so that players could design their own special rules in the Army Forge along with creating their own units. Now, during the live stream, the update discussed how the project is moving forward, and the new system is going to take special rules and break them into 3 parts. There's the trigger, for example, when this unit shoots, when this unit is deployed, when this unit casts a spell, whatever it is, the trigger. There's the assignment, that is the unit that will receive the effect, +1 to this, penalty to that, whatever. And then there's the effect. So +1 to hit, regen against spells, what have you. So then every trigger, every single assignment, and every single effect will be given its own point value, so that you can create whatever special rule you want by combining these 3 elements. and the points will then simply be calculated based on a set amount and will be in alignment with the weapons and stat lines that have already been calculated into Army Forge. Now, as I said before, I was intrigued by this idea because it will make armies 100% almost open source. You can design anything from the ground up. The only trick is, can you make it balanced? And if he can make it work, he'll have completely unshackled army building and made it about as open as you want. If a player is willing to take the time, they can literally craft every single element of every model and unit in their army and truly make it theirs. You can have rule sets now that are as unique as paint schemes. Now, it does run the risk of overload, because if everyone starts creating their own lists, pretty soon nobody knows what anybody is running. So that is a potential downside. However, since the community lists are one thing and the set OPR army books, the official army books, don't change, you still have that foundation. So you could have a tournament and say, for example, all armies must be one of these set established OPR lists. Whereas for casual play, you could come up with your own custom list, and as long as it has that mark that it's balanced, you'll be good to go. So I'm really surprised at how quickly he was able to move on with this, and I'm optimistic about where it could go. Okay, moving on. The next 2 STL model lines have been announced. For the Grimdark Future, it's the Orc Marauders, and for the Age of Fantasy, it's the Dwarves. Now, during the live stream, Tano went to great lengths to point out that these orcs are what he envisions for OnePageRules, and are not in any way meant to be the more accentuated and eccentric kind that players might be used to. Essentially, what he needed to say was, these are not 40k orcs. But instead, he took a long time trying to say that without actually saying it. Just come out and say it. The OPR orcs are going to be more uniform, civilized, honorable, which is totally fine. But at several other points in the live stream, especially when describing model designs for the Wood Elves, the Orcs, the Dwarves, over and over and over, he reiterated that he doesn't want to do what everyone else does, that he wants to be different, he wants to be unique, and so on. Now, that's fine to a point. Some tropes and cliches stick around because they have value, so don't discard something just because it's familiar. And on the flip side, there are reasons why some things haven't been done before. So I don't mind new things. And we've seen with the design of previous models. For example, in Quest, he creates individual characters that are playing against type. For example, the Demon Barbarian. Or as he showed in this live stream, I believe it was like an alien infiltrator. Something you wouldn't normally associate. Or the fact that the Rat clans are being portrayed as very noble rather than as vermin. So this is good. Playing against type adds a little bit of flavor, but if you go too far and are constantly trying to define your army and your lore by simply doing the opposite of what's standard, you're actually becoming less original than you might think, because you're so concerned with being different that you end up just kind of following the trend and then going against it. So I'm totally okay with his idea of wanting to be new and unique, but sometimes new and unique isn't as new and unique as you might think. Now, a bit more about the orcs. Now, they're going to get, of course, all the detail when the models slowly get released or the STLs get released and we go over them in the monthly reviews. But for now, as I was watching and listening and taking a look at the initial drawings and sketches, overall they look pretty decent, although I do see them running the risk of looking like just green HDF. In fact, seeing the orc truck reminded me quite a bit of the HDF armored personnel carrier that was showed off earlier in the live stream. So this is what I mean. Don't stray so far from the stereotype of orcs that you wander into a different stereotype and become something else. However, it's early on. As he said, these are preliminary drawings. Nothing is carved in stone. I just wanted to point that out. I think some elements of the orc designs look really good, especially the idea he had for the boarding rig on the truck. He said it's like the bars of a jungle gym that orcs can hold on to so that the truck can carry more than just who can fit in the cab and the bed. I think it's an excellent way of taking the old cliche from the Warhammer days of when you could put as many models in a truck as could fit in there, and they piled in and it looked really chaotic. But now he's given it a bit of logic and a bit of reason and a bit of design, and suddenly it's the same function. It's piling more orcs into the same transport, but it's doing it in a way that makes sense. So if his goal is to try and create orcs that look honorable, that look intelligent, that look, reasonable, that's a great way of doing it, while still maintaining this look of them being not necessarily a horde army, but being a little more aggressive. What other army is going to have its soldiers hang on to the end while it drives miles and miles into combat? I don't know. Okay, moving on to Age of Fantasy. Any of you who've been watching the channel for a little while now know that I'm a huge fan of my dwarf armies. I even did a huge series of videos on that massive collection of prints that I got from Highland Miniatures, and I did an unboxing, painting, and a whole bunch of other stuff even before starting to record Bat Reps. So I think the reason I'm not more excited about the OnePageRules Dwarf release is because I kind of got my fix on dwarfs for a bit, and I wasn't really looking to expand it, at least not yet. So maybe that's good. Maybe it will enable me to be more objective when looking at these prints and not just gush over them as I've been accused of doing in the past. Generally, from what I've seen so far in the live stream, they look like what you'd expect from dwarves. There's hammers, there's shields, there's axes, and there's lots and lots of armor and hair. So I guess they're not trying to break stereotypes with every army. Now, I will say I'm a bit torn over the loss of the bear cavalry. OnePageRules is making the dwarves coal miner themed. Again, that's not exactly playing against type here. But since bears don't usually live in coal mines, the bears are being replaced by mechanical mounts that look like bears. So I'm cautiously optimistic. It could work. It could also suck. So we've seen in one of the primary sketches what it could look like. I'm curious when it turns into the final STL. Now, one last little item that was mentioned during the live stream with both the elves and the dwarves that I thought was kind of interesting. The elves are a single faction, but there are three clear subgroups, if you will, within that faction. You have the elves, you have the animal units, and then you have the bug units. And they all match aesthetically, they all come together as an army. You can field members of all three units together, and it still looks like a wood elf army. But Tano mentioned that it's possible to play a wood elf army that's actually entirely the bug units. Or that he also mentioned you could play a human defense force army that's entirely robot units and mechs and have no fleshy little humans in them at all. I wonder if the long game here is to make each of the army books a general faction, but then have split-offs or subsets within that faction. And eventually you won't just have the human defense force, but you'll have human defense force robots. And then there will be additional unique rules and benefits for playing an entire army of just that faction. So that could be where he's going. I might be reading too much into it, but I'd be very curious if that's the long game that he's playing, because I think it's an intriguing idea. Okay, so that's quite a bit of news and a little bit of editorializing. So let's move on now to talking about the February STL releases. First, let's take a look at the scatter terrain. It's desert themed. And in the live stream, Tano said something very interesting. He said these pieces aren't meant to be put down alone or by themselves. He said the goal in the designing was to put 2 or 3 of them together to create a larger group of area terrain. Now, I could see doing that quite easily. Take the 3 pieces, put them together, maybe add some rocks, sand, trees, other filler to close in the gaps, and pull it all together, and you'd have some pretty big terrain footprints that would then be easy to store because they're broken down into smaller pieces. Anyone who has massive buildings or ruins knows how difficult it is to find storage for all that stuff. Now, an honest question here. When the game setup says we're supposed to have 20 or so pieces of terrain, would that cluster of terrain pieces still count as 1? Or would that count as 2 to 3? Because sometimes when I'm setting up a game and it says 20 plus pieces of terrain, sometimes that seems like too much for the scenario, sometimes it doesn't seem like enough. I know it's just a general guideline, but still, I was curious. Up next is the quest model for Fantasy, a Change Demon Warlock. I guess sometimes we go for the unorthodox and play against type, and sometimes we go scuba diving in the orthodox pool. A demon warlock isn't exactly an odd pairing. Still, it's pretty good. As I said, sometimes you gotta go with the cliche because it works. It looks really shamanistic. I think it could easily fit into a Change Demon army as a hero or a sergeant without breaking the look of the army at all, unlike a mini that was designed to be more unorthodox. For example, if you have your War Demon army and you put in that Demon Barbarian, it's going to look a little weird when suddenly one of your demons is wearing a hide and animal skin and nobody else is. Now, on the other hand, we have the quest model for Grimdark Future, and it's a Robot Legion's Pathfinder. Now, maybe it's just because I enjoy watching old Clint Eastwood movies, but I really like the look of this one. The poncho, the way the rifle looks more do-it-yourself, almost like you'd see in Fallout, as if he's put that thing together from pieces over time. The whole look, I think, is fantastic. And right now, I'm currently toying with the idea of putting together a skirmish team that's entirely Wild West themed. So I found a few alien and robot models that are pretty perfect and have a nice Western look to them. And I'm wondering if this guy may just have to be added to that list. Moving on to things that I think look really good, I love these bikes. They look like a great mix between motocross and racing, rather than your typical street bike, chopper, or Harley, which makes sense given the overall aesthetic for the Human Defense Force. Now, this is probably just me. I honestly don't like the hero pose because the bike isn't moving. The models are so dynamic, you can almost hear the whine of the engines just by looking at them. And then you look at the hero, and it's like he's ruining the model by not racing and instead standing there. Again, just me. Now, as for the Stormtroopers, I think they look pretty good. My only hang-up is they don't really look all that different from the basic trooper models. The biggest difference is the cape. And then there's a few more differences from the waist down. Hear me out, I'm not being awkward here. The basic troops just have pants and boots with a knee pad, while the Stormtroopers have armored boots that are basically knee-high, and then there's armor plating on the thighs as well. But overall, it kind of just looks like the same troopers with a cape. Because once you put those models on the table, there's not going to be too many people staring at the feet to look at armor on the legs. So I guess I was hoping to see something that, from the waist up, would differentiate the elite a little bit more than just adding some cloth to the back. But then again, that might be enough. Next up are the light walkers, and I don't know if light is the right word to use. These things are huge. I've seen the Tactical Titan, and these don't look a whole lot smaller. When I picture a light walker, I think of something slightly larger than man-sized. Maybe a bit bigger, like, for example, the ogres for the Human Defense Force. If those are pure robots or walkers, I would consider those light. The medium to be a bit higher, and then these bad boys would be considered heavy. I mean, if it's bigger than a 40K Dreadnought, those things definitely aren't considered light, and yet these look a bit larger. Don't get mad at me. I love the look of them. The design, everything is just fine. I just don't think they come across as light. I don't picture something that big being used for recon, scouting, or something else that you normally would associate with light troops. So that's it for the HDF releases for February. Let's move on to the Wood Elves. First of all, we have the Wardens. Overall, I think they have a good look to them, and making the sword blades wooden is an interesting touch. It keeps the aesthetic natural. But I would highly recommend whoever paints these, make sure you put some runes, magic, or do something when painting those blades because, well, practice swords are made out of wood for a reason. And so you don't want to paint your elite troopers with wooden blades unless they've got something else magical or ethereal or arcane animating them. Now the command squad looks pretty solid too. I've commented previously about the banner. I think it's a little bit too perfect for the natural forest-themed army that it represents, but the musician looks good. It looks like the pipe he's playing is made out of a horn or something like that. And they've also, for the sergeant, managed to incorporate that adorable little pet that's kind of now the one of the trademarks of these models. But they've included it in a way that adds to the model. It's not just like perched on his shoulder just to be there. I can absolutely see an army like the Wood Elves using small animals and birds as scouts, or to gather information or something like that. So having the sergeant here holding his arm out so the owl can perch on it, that's not just being cute. That's something that really fits in. So typically I give a hard time to the models for the little Pokemons that are being added to it, but in this case I think it works. Now moving on here, we have the cavalry. They don't look too bad. I think those are supposed to be reindeer, which works because they're big, powerful animals, but aren't they normally found in colder climates? Doesn't the hair, I don't know if it's called a mane or what have you, but that implies that they're in kind of cold areas, but the riders are half naked and the rest of the army is barefoot. So I don't know, it just seems a little bit confusing to me. I'm probably just being picky though. And lastly, we have the chimera. I don't know if chimera is the right word to use. A chimera is a blend of animals. This one looks, 75% like an owl. It's just got more defined limbs and its tail's a little bit longer. It looks good, and I think it's a great looking model and it would be very menacing on the table. I would have called it like the Owl Beast or the Great Owl King or something other than chimera. The term chimera brings a lot of baggage, and this model doesn't seem to have an overhead compartment. Phew. So that's it for the month in review. This was kind of a long one, so if you stuck around to the end, thank you very much. If you haven't already, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment down below. It helps the channel out. And let me know what you think. What models are you excited about? What do you think about the upcoming orcs and the dwarves and all the other stuff that we talked about? Until next time, keep your dice on the table.